Okay, you can start.
Hello and welcome to the Able Contemporary Gallery. I'm Teresa Able, the owner of the gallery, and I am so pleased to be joined tonight by Kelly Connole and Danny Saathoff. They are artists who are currently featured in our number 5 gallery space. They have a wonderful installation called Keeping Time. I'm also pleased to be joined with Anne Orleski, the gallery director, and Lauren Miller, the assistant gallery director. Lauren Miller will be interviewing Kelly and Danny tonight about specific pieces in the show, the installation in general. They may talk about all sorts of different things. And then at the end of this conversation, we'll open it up for a Q&A. Thanks again. If you have any questions and you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can type your questions to Facebook. So this will also be taped, and so we can watch it later. And it will be available on our website and also our Facebook page. So I'm going to hand this off to Lauren Miller. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Teresa. I'm just going to introduce these wonderful artists first, and we're going to play a video of the installation in the background. Kelly Connole is a professor of art at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. She earned her MFA from San Francisco State University and her BFA from the University of Montana. Her work combines the tactile nature of clay with images of memories and emotions, addressing relationships within environments, both natural and constructed, human and animal. Her work has been exhibited in numerous galleries across the country. She is the recipient of many awards, notably the McKnight Residency, a Jerome Project Grant, a Minnesota State Arts Board Grant, and a McKnight Fellowships in 2014 and 2019. We're also joined by Danny Saathoff. He's an artist and arts educator at Carleton College as well in Northfield, Minnesota. He's a contemporary jeweler first and foremost. Saathoff sees his sculptural work as an extension of his jewelry practice, as both mediums take into consideration site-specific factors of space and ergonomics. Informed by his insatiable curiosity, which leads him down many rabbit holes of YouTube and internet searches, Saathoff experiments with fabrication of eclectic items such as kitchen utensils, light fixtures, and boats. Thank you both so much for joining me. So I'd like to start by talking about collaborative work. So this show contains both some individual work and some collaborative work. And I'd like to start with the piece that is the namesake of the show, Keeping Time, which is the piece you see behind me here. And in the video, it's the piece with the crows around this kind of celestial clock. And I'm just gonna let this video play through so that I can start getting to these images. So this Keeping Time piece, this is from the artist. This collaborative work explores time on a human and astrological scale as we reflect on the vulnerability of the human body and our short existence on this planet. Rhythmic sounds tick like a timepiece, while rotational movement mimics the labor of the human heart. Visual repetition evokes celestial journeys and that of the red and white blood cells pulsing through our veins. Crows stand to witness to the vulnerability and enterprise of life. So this is a complicated and multimedia piece. Can we talk a little bit of the physicality of it? Like what are we looking at and how does it work?
Kelly, do you want to take that one or do you want me to take it?
Well, I'll start it,
Okay.
and then I think you jump in with the how does it work, because
Okay.
that's where you really shine. So what we're looking at is really a timepiece of sorts. So it's a illogical timepiece in many ways, but it is about sort of passage of time represented through different materials. So we can talk more about the conceptual piece, but I will just tell you a little bit about the technical aspects of it. So you mentioned, Lauren, that it's multimedia. It's made of lots of different kinds of things. So the ceramic pieces are the birds, the crows are ceramic. Their feet are 3D printed in a nylon resin. The material at the base of each of the 7 towers is clay harvested from the Carleton Arboretum, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that clay when I talk about another piece later. And then also porcelain clay, so something that comes very local and something from far away. And I think the combination of those materials that I'm really familiar with the materials that Danny's very familiar with in wood and metal, and creating something that is kinetic, that moves, those things all sort of came together as in a way to create this this timepiece, this thing that moves and does really for us, and we can talk conceptually again about why that is, but for us mimics so much the activity of the human body through rhythm. So Danny, how does it work?
Oh gosh, so it is a mechanized piece. So there is a motor. It does get plugged into the wall, but there's a motor in that center hub that spins very slowly, and I liken it to a marionette. There are all of these lines that come from each of those 7 towers that come into the center to this single axis pin that is rotating in a 5-inch throw, which as these lines kind of move back and forth, circular motion translates into linear motion, which turns into vertical motion. And it allows these arcs on the top to kind of rock back and forth in a very organized way, but it also feels very precarious. And there's actually a stainless steel ball on the top of each of these arcs that rolls back and forth. And as they kind of hit one side or the other, they tick in this really lovely kind of rhythmic sound. And it's very mesmerizing. It's very slow moving. And I love, one of my favorite things to see happen when I'm in the gallery with a piece like this is to see somebody kind of look at it and then realize something is moving. And then all of a sudden they do this double take, and then they stop and they freeze. And it's just like time stands still, and yet it's continuing on with this machine that is so fascinating to look at. And it's just one of my favorite things to see happen. And it happened over and over again the night that we were there for the opening.
Yeah, and there's these ceramic blood cells that are kind of stored in the bottom of these pieces, which are really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. So when Danny and I started talking about this exhibition nearly a year ago, last January, February, I think, we've worked together a few times before, but this is definitely the most intensive collaboration that we've done. And we both just talked about what was on our mind, like what were we interested in making. And for me, I've been working with this clay that we harvest right locally here for quite a while, and thinking about the clay as a way of thinking about place-based learning, of thinking about this place and our connection to the place. And in my work, I often think about kind of the space between living and dead, the space between the sky and the earth, the space between genders, that in-between kind of space. And so for me, what I had on my mind was blood, and thinking about metaphors from the earth and from the human body. And so I think at first Danny thought, blood, how are we going to make work about blood, right? And I had already started making these blood cells, the red and white blood cells, kind of on my own path. But we found ways to really I think in the sense of true collaboration, that we took our disparate ideas and found the places that they connected together, and those evolved over time as we were working together. So for me, the blood cells is about the human body and that sense of a heart that's pumping these things. But they're kind of the physical manifestation of that metaphor, I guess is a way I would state it.
Yeah. And I like how each of these, like each of the pillars has these two levels, kind of like how the hearts contract, that lub dub sound that you hear of the ventricles opening and contracting. And so you say in the statement that these crows are like standing in for witnesses. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And you work a lot with crows in your work, and I'm curious about some what you found through working with crow imagery.
Sure. I first started making crows a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, or even a little more than that. So often I start making something in response to something in the world, and then if it connects with me deeper, then I feel like I have to do some research and figure out, well, why else would I be connecting with this? So for me, I started making crows first off when the West Nile virus was making its way through Minnesota, and crows were just dying in huge numbers. And so I suddenly had specimens all over. I would walk through Loring Park in Minneapolis, and there would be dead crows all over the place from the West Nile virus. And so I was able to photograph them and study them and feel what their bodies felt like, and really investigate them. When I decided that I actually wanted to go further with the idea, then I guess for me, crows, I kept coming back to crows as tricksters in so many cultures, that crows are animals that are urgent in the way they communicate. So the sound of a crow, I think, is such a prominent sound. They are kind of tricksters, that they recognize people. They're profoundly smart. And so that if you do something nasty to crows, they will teach their other crow friends that you're a bad person. And that's all documented through research, not my research, but it's very clear that crows are incredibly intelligent birds. I guess maybe the most significant interest I have in crows is that in the animal world, the bird world, they are one of the few species of birds that male and females look identical. They mate for life, and unlike cardinals or robins or birds that you can clearly see which is male and which is female, crows occupy this ambiguous space in terms of their gender, and that's very appealing to me as a maker. So in terms of them standing witness, I would say that I love the feeling of something that's beautiful or cute to look at when it's one or two. But then when it's many, it becomes unsettling. And I think that birds in general have that feeling to me, but crows in particular. And part of that is our cultural norming of, Alfred Hitchcock movies and things of crows being kind of dangerous creatures. But I think that one or two is interesting. And then when you're surrounded by a whole murder of crows, it really can be unsettling, both in the sound and then the movement of the birds. It's really interesting.
Can I just jump in on that? I mean, if you were to imagine this single piece with that single crow in the middle, it would be, it would be cute. It would have, it would be sitting there as this kind of marker of something. But when you add them together with this cluster, this, all of these towers, some of them have 3, some of them have 2, some are 4, it really does become this kind of unsettling thing. I think that Kelly nailed it with, the fact that you have one, it's one thing, and when you have a bunch of them, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, and often in art, when we see one figure, it can easily stand in for the viewer. And then this has so many potential perspectives with how many crows are in the room. It's really fascinating. Is there any significance to the 7 towers?
I'll take this, Kelly.
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, in some ways, we toyed around with this a lot. You know, we were kind of talking about how what does the number 7 mean? What does, you know, if you start kind of looking at the different numbers of things, do we have a certain number of crows that signify, you know, something? You know, we looked at all of that. We toyed around with all of that, and we didn't quite resolve that, in that there, you know, we didn't have a set reason for each of the numbers. In my mind, this piece kind of feels like, you know, it feels like a calendar or a timepiece. It has all of these elements of time. And in some ways, I kind of look at it, and I'm not trying to compare us to Stonehenge by any means, or the people that created Stonehenge, or the entity that created Stonehenge. But this has a very similar kind of feel, in that these are like these monuments kind of all in a circular formation. Is it a calendar? You know, we talked about that. Is there a way to kind of tie in, you know, the number of days, or, you know, all of those kind of celestial entities? You know, why do we have this celestial map up here? And I think it's all of it. You know, it's not like there's any one thing. It's kind of everything. You know, Kelly and I joke about, you know, when we didn't know what to do with something, we just added more to it. And I think that this piece kind of embodies that. It's like not any one thing, but it's everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just so much that you could bring to this piece, and I think that is why it's connecting with people so easily. I think a lot about how birds use the stars to navigate, and how our bodies are, you know, the moon pulls on the water in our bodies, and like how all mass is connected. It's a really compelling piece. A few more close-ups of these crows in the centerpiece.
Can I also just kind of tag on to what Kelly was talking about, with just the you know, you'd asked about the blood cells, and when we first started talking about this piece, you know, Kelly brought this idea of blood in, and I didn't really know what to do with that information, or how to process that information, or how it works in my life. I mean, Kelly and I both, you know, we're both parents of kids that are not biologically ours. So that was one of those areas where, you know, blood relationships are, you know, we have that in common. But my son, in last February, as we were kind of in the middle of all of this, he started getting sick, and he came down with endocarditis, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a bacterial infection of the blood that manifests itself in the heart. So all of a sudden, blood became a really big thing in my life. So it was just amazing how all of this kind of transpired and came together. And my son is fine now, but it was a really crappy spring and early summer. But it's again, it was one of those things that all of a sudden this piece started to make a whole lot more sense. And I couldn't be happier with the outcome.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's really interesting to me that it is such a bodily piece, or a lot of these pieces are referencing the body without, and death, and all of these kind of hard to deal with subjects, but they're doing it in such a way that it's appealing to look at, and it draws you in, and it makes you want to engage with it, with topics that we generally try to avoid. Great.
So
Let's
Lauren,
talk about...
You're speaking my language. I think that tension between unsettling and beautiful, and for me, that is that tension of life and death is really what's propelled my work for a couple of decades.
Yeah. This is another collaborative work in the gallery that is also behind me, just to the side here. And this is called Moon Adrift. And this is the statement that accompanies it. A meditation on beauty and fragility. This collaborative work provides visual evidence of the labor of the human hand. In a time of civil unrest teamed with a global pandemic and widespread concern for the longevity of our planet, we hold space for the gentleness of beauty. from time immemorial, people have adorned their bodies, their shelters, their objects, with visual delight as a celebration of the world around us. In this work, we find kinship with the artists and craftspeople. So this is a spectacular piece. You really have to, I think, be in the space to experience it. I guess it's a lot of these, I could say that, but I think that's the comment of the kind of invisible labor is really compelling here in the physicality of this piece. So let's talk materiality first. What is it? You brought a boat into the gallery. How do you do that? And it's got this absolute cloud of porcelain butterflies that are each being suspended by a string into this kind of chandelier formation. So let's talk a little bit about what this is.
Danny, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so obviously porcelain butterflies, a lot of them. Kelly knows exactly how many, I'm sure. And there's this wonderful, Kelly, is that wool or what is the thread or the yarn?
Yeah, it's mohair.
Okay.
Mohair.
Yeah.
That is
It
really
glows, yeah.
It glows. It's just Kelly sourced this and spent I know a lot of time looking for this material, and you've used it in other pieces before, and it is just a spectacular material to look at. I don't know how Kelly can keep these things all straight. I mean, she's done this many times and is really good at it. There's a structure that everything hangs from that kind of references a compass, maybe. There's a metal grate that everything suspends from, and then the boat. This piece has really gotten a lot of mileage. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this thing. I built this boat specifically because I wanted a little sailboat. It has been in more museums and galleries than it has ever seen water. It's a truly functional boat, but it's hung in more beautiful spaces than it's ever seen water. I built it back in, I don't know, maybe 2015, 2016, and it just is such a beautiful object. And it's made of wood, and it's made of polyester Dacron material, which is made specifically for both boat building and for experimental aircraft, if you can believe it. So people make wings out of this material, and it's a heat shrinkable material. So it's really fascinating to work with. So you kind of glue it on, and then you heat it, and it shrinks down drum tight. So it's a really wonderful material to work with if you can figure out a way to make it do what you want it to do. So that's what the materials are, and everything is suspended. So it kind of looks like in this photograph that the boat is sitting on the ground. It's actually not. It's kind of suspended, and it's hovering just above the floor. So air currents can make these things move, and I think that's really wonderful. So it does feel like it's floating.
And that there's this cloud of butterflies in place of the sail. I kept waiting for you to rig up this piece, and then it was like this. I was like, oh, that's that's really cool. That are kind of in this like lovely like moon formation almost. It's really cool. Is there any color symbolism going on here with the purple?
That's a good question. I think that that purpley blue thread, for me, it's just so vibrant. I don't know how to explain it except that color like vibrates in my chest when I look at it. And as Denny mentioned, when I first started thinking about hanging butterflies a few years ago, I tried so many different materials before I hit on this particular one. I just love that it creates an atmosphere. And I think that blue is like the intensity of blue water or blue sky that, again, is making that connection between kind of the different spaces on Earth. And there's a fragility to it, but then because each strand is so fine, but then when you step back and see it, it becomes a mass in the same way that flock of birds or a school of fish, or something becomes a mass in itself when it's dense like that. And as Danny mentioned, this piece is a different kind of collaboration than Keeping Time. Keeping Time, we truly collaborated on every single decision that was made in that piece. And I think in this work, it was much more taking ideas that we had worked with in the past. So for me, the hanging butterflies, and for Danny, the boat, and figuring out how to bring those two things together. And we actually had so many different iterations before we came to the idea of the moon being sort of transported. So I think your reflections on the tide and how the tide affects our bodies, that very much was on our mind in this piece of thinking of the I don't know how to say it really, besides like like floating of the moon, like transporting the moon.
And again, this is a piece that it references the body in that, you know, we kind of naturally insert a body into that boat or imagine our bodies in that boat. And with your statement talking a little bit about civil unrest, the pandemic, this doesn't look like a pandemic piece, you know, like it's kind of like you don't see any markers of the, you know, of what we've come to expect with pandemic, or like there isn't these markers. So how do you reconcile those two ideas? Like, how do you see those elements of, you know, the pandemic or the civil unrest or just everything we've been going through in the last 2 years? How do you see that connecting with this piece?
Danny, do you want to take it? I have thoughts, but I don't want to.
You go ahead and start this one, Kelly.
Okay. So, Lauren, I really appreciate that idea of like, it doesn't look like a pandemic piece. And for me, I think it's exactly what I need in the pandemic, right? That I think that if you think of people throughout time, even in the hardest of situations, artists and craftspeople have come back to a place of beauty and holding beauty sort of central. And I know when I was in school as a young artist in the 80s, there was a real rejection of beauty, that art was meant to be something else. And I respect that so much of art is in response to what's happened before. But I think that for me at this moment in my life, that meditation on beauty is really critical to weathering the stress of a pandemic, or acknowledging, I think, that honest storytelling about what it means to be on this land, what it means to be an American, what it means to be the product of genocide, that those things that we have to find places for beauty in a way to understand what is the point of existence, I guess. I mean, that's quite lofty claim, but I think it really is what art is for me, is transformative, that we can find rest. We can find rest in even the most troubled times.
Great.
And I think too that, you know, we're both working, you know, Kelly being a ceramic artist, and I'm a jewelry designer and kind of a woodworker, and I do a little bit of everything. You know, that working in these kind of craft mediums, I don't kind of hate saying it that way, but you know, we definitely are paying attention to the way that we put things together, and having the ability to create these beautiful objects, you know, using human hands is something that I think both Kelly and I really resonate with. And I think there was just something kind of poetic about the way that, you know, we have this boat that is a possibility to kind of incorporate and kind of work around. And then for Kelly to kind of come in and create this cloud above it, you know, it's just again, it's kind of a lot of things all wrapped up in one. And I think Kelly kind of, you know, really said it nicely in, you know, the way that you spoke about this piece. But I think that just, you know, coming back to the human hand and how we manipulate materials to create these objects, and sometimes not even really knowing why we're doing it or what we're doing, but eventually some meaning might come out of it. It's sort of the way I work on a day-to-day basis. I don't always have a plan for what I'm doing, and I think that's sort of how this piece kind of came about in some ways.
Great. Thank you. That was really beautiful. So what are some challenges that you faced when you were working in the number 5 space? Or was there anything unexpected, good or bad, that you noticed while working in a space that is kind of has its own presence?
Oh, that was the pure delight of this. So I came to visit your beautiful space 2 years ago, like a year, 18 months ago, something like that, because I wanted to just get a sense of what the space looked like, even before Danny and I decided to collaborate on this exhibition. And for my aesthetic and what I'm interested in, the history of your building, the visual information. There's, I think, a number 12 or something on the wall. There are so many things in that space that just resonate with the kind of work that I make, that I feel like there was no obstacle whatsoever in this space. I guess maybe the biggest obstacle is just living far away from you all. And so there are a number of times that Danny and I, we made a paper model, and so we could kind of figure out the spacing, and it would have been very handy if we could have just popped over to look at it and to think about how things were going to fit in the space. But that's kind of the beauty, I think, of making work that is site specific. And I would say that these pieces are not, they're designed for the space, but they are not as site specific as I sometimes work, where really the space completely informs the work. But for me, the space was just ideal for the kind of themes that we're working with.
And I'll say that this space is like, I mean, if you could design a space that just sings Kelly Connole, this is one of them, because you've got these nice, beautiful white walls, but you also have this history and these gorgeous, wood walls, and this kind of beat up floor that's sort of, creaky and a little wonky in places, and it has its own presence. And we got to just come in and kind of, work with what was there and really try to enhance what was there. But I think the combination of your space and our work, I mean, it feels like a marriage made in heaven. I mean, it's really beautiful. I think that those walls, the in the image that we're seeing in the background there, those wooden walls are just so, I mean, I'm so glad you didn't cover those up, because they're just gorgeous. The color, you can tell there's age and history. And if Kelly could just kind of bundle this up and kind of put it up someplace else, I think she would.
I would move in if I could.
There you go. Yeah.
We've had people say that they want to spend, some like significant time in this place. Maybe we should start renting it out. So let's talk a little bit about some of the individual works in this exhibition. So this piece is called Blood Balance, and this is by Kelly. So can you talk a little bit about this piece, about what we're seeing here?
Sure. This is the newest piece, I would say, in the show, in the sense that it came together just right before we came over. So in creating this piece, I was thinking a lot about blood relations. So what does it mean to be biologically connected to another person? So to share DNA with another person, and then also again, that connection to the earth, and thinking about the blood in our bodies and the blood or the iron in the earth, and trying to make a parallel there. So my father died about 11 months ago, and my biological mother had died a decade before. And as Danny mentioned, my wife and I have 2 fantastic children, but I don't share a blood connection to them, right? They're absolutely my children, but they're not genetically my children. So thinking about the sort of the balance between blood, blood quantum, blood connections, blood relations, and the labor of love. And so the hands to me are a way of thinking about action and expressions of love through doing. And how do we balance those things? So it was important for me, and with Danny's engineering help, important to me that the piece actually does balance. It's terrifying to have it actually balanced, but it is that one post in the middle is all that's holding it onto the wall, and then the weight of the fired earth and the hands is in balance. And I wanted the fulcrum to be off center as a way of thinking of how, again, that feeling of unsettledness, that if it was directly in the middle, that for me wouldn't have that same tension of something that feels a bit more precarious. This piece, again, in the same way that I respond so much to your space, it was important for me to have a combination of materials that are new materials that I could manipulate, but most important that it is composed of the objects that I've made, but then also elements that were found elements. So the shelf itself is something that was in Danny's studio for a decade or so, that when I was trying to describe what I had in my head and what I was going to make, Danny said, "Oh, I have just the right piece of wood for you that has all this age and the patina of time." So I love that problem solving. I love to make new things that don't necessarily look new. So the mechanism, the kind of goofy basket contraption that's holding the shelf is how do I say it? I like things that their use is ambiguous, but they're so unbelievably specific in the way that they're constructed. And for me, like old farm implements have that, blacksmithing things sort of have that, and that cast iron piece certainly has that sort of patina of age and also the specificity of its function, but that has been lost in time. Lauren, I think when we were chatting before, you talked about your interest in science and how then you came into the world of art history. And I, for most of my early life, really thought that I would be a scientist of sorts. And so that I think comes into my work a lot, this sort of tension between science and art. And I guess I will even take back that word tension, because I think that there's so much serendipity in the way that artists and scientists think about process and think about the knowledge for the sake of knowledge, that often research is not necessarily to an end point, but is more about the play of trying things. And this piece embodies that for me, that it's about putting disparate things together in some sort of order that makes sense to me. And I hope that others find a way in to the sort of sadness of the hands and the sadness of the blood. To me, those things are really present in the work.
Yeah, and I do think that there is a huge connection between the type of thinking that science evokes and the type of thinking that art evokes. Like, I think there's a very similar type of looking and a type of critical thinking that goes into both, and that's a really nice resonance together. And again, it's a piece that literally is dealing with blood. This is, I think in the description you say that this is how much blood is in a human body, like an average adult human body, which is kind of jarring to see out, and just like that. So it's so reductive of a human form to be reduced to just the blood. And then these severed hands that, are kind of almost toy-like, but also, I don't know, it's a really interesting piece. And let's talk about these overview effect pieces that Danny made. So are these also made from that same aircraft material?
They are. So just talking about the structures that we have here. Again, these are wooden structures. that are skinned with this polyester cloth. And as the boat fabric was meant for, the creation of boats and for experimental aircraft, this is like the light version for people that make remote control airplanes. So, I mean, one of my favorite art stores is, any place that sells remote control airplanes and cars and drones and all of that. They have, places like that. There's a place near me, it's a hobby shop that has just aisles of all of these little widgets and different things that are so specific, kind of going back to Kelly's, these very specific things that, you may not know what they're for unless you're in the know. But they can be useful in so many other different ways, especially as a jewelry designer. All of these things are miniaturized. So it's one of my favorite places to kind of peruse. But so this fabric comes from that world. But again, it's a heat shrinkable material that you can skin these things and you get this very sheer effect, and they're illuminated. So there's lights inside, and because every good art has to have at least one disco ball. There are disco balls hanging on the wall to kind of spray lights out in these pieces. You can see one of them on the left, kind of protruding from the wall. So yeah, it's just a way to kind of create these spotlights, and they're there. You can kind of see them if you're really looking. And there's little windows in these pieces that you can kind of catch a glimpse inside to see what's going on. So do you want me to talk about the piece in general? Just
yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay. So these pieces were part of another sculpture that I created, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I was thinking at the time, I was thinking about climate change, and, we'd referenced climate change in our statements. And just, thinking about climate change and thinking about artwork and how my artwork can kind of reflect, what's going on in the world. And I had this idea for a piece of art that I wanted to create this kinetic piece where these ice pieces would be kind of in this circular pattern and kind of undulating. So rhythmic motion again, creating this undulation of these icebergs, kind of as though they were floating on the surface of the water. So I had this in my head. I knew how to build it. I kind of formulated how to do it, but it was going to be a big piece. So I knew that I wasn't going to just build it without having a purpose for it or a place for it. And I knew it was going to take a little bit of funding to do. So I applied for a Minnesota State Arts Board grant that was ultimately funded to allow me to build this piece. And so in getting this funding, it also allowed me to tap into the knowledge of some local scientists. Here where I'm at right now, I'm in Duluth, Minnesota, and right down the road here, there's the University of Minnesota Duluth campus that also has an entity called the Large Lakes Observatory, and they study large lakes all over the world. And I was able to tap into some of the scientists there and talk to them about what's happening locally, because we all think about climate change on a massive scale. We all know about glaciers melting and polar bears losing their habitat. I wanted to know what was happening locally, specifically on the Great Lakes, and even more specifically on Lake Superior, to find out how ice was being affected here. So that's kind of a big, long story of kind of the backstory. But I was able to talk to them, kind of figure out what was going on. And so I created this piece with that mindset. And so in its original capacity, it was, all of these pieces were horizontal to the ground, but, about eye level. And they would move, they would undulate with this motor mechanism kind of driving the system. But I always knew that it would be really interesting to take these same pieces and, change the orientation and put them on the wall and see how they would work. And in so many ways, I kind of like this better. Just the way it looks on the wall. They're very dimensional. I mean, they're about, 10 inches deep. And you can walk up to them. You can kind of peer into them. And the name, the overview effect, came from a very recent story that I heard on NPR. Every good artist talk, I think, also has to reference William Shatner in some way, shape, or form. William Shatner was blasted off into space recently, right? On Jeff Bezos' very uniquely shaped rocket ship. And when he came back, he had this profound, this moment of profound gratitude for all things Earth, and being able to see the Earth from such a place, in the high atmosphere, really changes your perspective on what we are doing to the Earth, what we're doing to each other. And they call that the overview effect. And I don't know if every, but astronauts talk about this all the time. And where you get to see the Earth from this new perspective, and it completely changes the way that you start to think about things and how you relate to things. And in some way that resonated with me, just the name, the overview effect, where we're kind of thinking globally, acting locally, trying to figure out how we can take that big information and apply it to what we know and what's dear to us, here at home. And so that's kind of what this piece is about. So these pieces definitely are meant to resemble icebergs, but not the same kind of icebergs you would see in the ocean, but ice that forms on lakes. It's kind of flat, and as the lakes break up, they can kind of start to move and undulate on the water. So that's where this piece kind of comes from. So it's a reinterpretation of a past piece, but I love it, especially on these dark walls, because these pieces really pop. I had them hanging in my studio, and I have white walls in my studio, and they were beautiful, but they don't have the same drama that they do in your space. So I have to find some wood walls like this the next time I show it.
Yeah, and just that they're kind of like in this orientation, that they are going back to your artist statement when you talk about you're first and foremost a jewelry artist, and that these sculptures are essentially adorning the space, is really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely come at my practice as a jewelry designer kind of first. I think maybe that's shifting a little bit, but for the majority of my career, I've been a jewelry designer, and I teach metalsmithing, and it's definitely at the core of everything that I do. And I take the same sensibilities that I do with designing a piece of jewelry and apply it to the sculpture that I make. Jewelry is very specific. It's site specific. The gallery for jewelry is the body. So, we have certain things that we have to think about. In a lot of ways, we are, kind of industrial designers, thinking about ergonomics and how jewelry relates to the body and how it can express things. Jewelry is meant to be beautiful, but it can also tell a story. And I think of jewelry as small scale sculpture in the same way that I think of the sculpture that I create as large scale jewelry. The thing that I like about the sculptural work is that I can typically tell a bigger story. Not that you can't say a lot in a very small package, but sometimes you can let things kind of linger, and just being able to kind of take this piece, and I assumed that it was all going to be on the same wall, but once we got into the space, just kind of start to look at the space and say, oh, let's put one of them over here and see how that relates. And I just love the way it wraps into that corner.
Yeah, and I love how it interacts with this moon adrift piece too, because it's kind of like the constellations or something off in the distance for this kind of seascape that's happening here.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that was completely intentional, but as we started to see how things were relating, we knew that they were going to relate to one another. I mean, the space is small enough that you knew that they were going to feed off of one another, and I do love how these two pieces interact. Even though they're separate pieces, they don't necessarily need to go together. They definitely feed off of one another.
Great. Anne, are there any questions coming in from Facebook, or do you have anything?
There are not any Facebook questions, but one question I had was, with your work dealing with issues of environmentalism and sort of our stewardship of the land, something that I think about often in my work as a maker is like, we're creating objects we're using materials to create these objects, and how do we sort of parallel our world as a maker and the things that we make, and how and that with being a good steward of the land. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly complex question, a complex thing to address. So I'm gonna kind of fumble my way through, and Danny, feel free to hop in too. But I think as a maker myself, I really vacillate between, should I ever fire another piece of ceramics? I love making things. I think that's sort of profound to my humanness, is a desire to make things. But once I fire earth, it's a synthetic material that, if ceramics, it does not exist except for human intervention. And once clay is fired, it can never return back to its original state. So there's this connection of the earth with ceramics, but also human intervention that creates something synthetic, right? So it's the first synthetic material. So I love ceramic history and thinking about this act that has existed for 30,000 years, and how I'm sort of a conduit of passing that knowledge from one generation to another. But all of what I know because other people discovered it. So as someone really interested in sustainability and the earth, it really is problematic, right? to fire things, and the amount of energy that is used to fire things. I think in some of these pieces, there are materials that are not great materials. There's polyester, there's plastic, there's lead in in one of my pieces, right? So materials that are heavy on the earth, that have a cost on the earth. So I don't have a really good answer, except for to say that I think it's really complicated. And in the same way that I think I'm delighted that we were able to bring the work over to your beautiful space. But then I think, well, there's a cost to that as well, just the environmental impact of driving things and renting a U-Haul and all of that. And the purpose of that is to create something beautiful, but at what cost, right? And I mean, I think that can be thought of in traveling, how incredible it is to travel and see other places. But then when you think about the environmental impact of an airplane trip, what is the sort of cost benefit analysis of those activities? So I think as makers, we're in and there's a part of me that thinks I'm only going to work with unfired clay and sticks for the rest of my career, because it is a gentler way to navigate. But then I fire porcelain and it becomes translucent, and I kind of lose my mind at how wonderful that is. And so I take it back right away, So I guess I don't really have a clear answer, but to say that I think it's something that I know I wrestle with, and I don't have a really clear answer how to deal with it. Danny, what do you think about that?
It's a complicated question. I do think about it more in my jewelry practice because of the nature of the materials that we're using. We're harvesting these precious materials from the earth and doing irreparable damage to the earth in that way, and harvesting gemstones and all of those kinds of things. So I do try to purchase recycled materials when possible. There's a company that we do the majority of our ordering through in the world of jewelry that I teach and work in. And most of their materials, the precious metals, are recycled materials. So there's solace there to some degree. There's still the processing that has to happen and transportation of all of those things. So we do the best we can with what we have available. I guess in my sculptural practice, it's probably different. I do use a lot of wood, and wood is a little, we're tearing down forests, but it's definitely renewable, and we can grow more trees. And hopefully we're not just, I'm not using extraordinary amounts of wood. I mean, if you look at the objects that I make, they're typically very light. So there's not a lot of material. Most of it's solid forms, but they're filled with air. So I'm not using just mass quantities of any one material. But yeah, those are things that weigh on our heads. That's, we have to kind of reconcile. And, polyester fabric is definitely not a good thing. And, that's going to live on for a good long time in the landfill after I'm done with these icebergs and boats. But hopefully, we're creating these things that can kind of live on for a good long life and, be seen and be beautiful. And I guess if there's any solace there, it's that we're making beautiful things out of these objects.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think about the flip side of that too, in like the preservation of artwork. It's looked highly upon artists to make things that will last through modernity, like last through time, so that art restorers can, put these in museums and preserve them for future generations. So there's always that grappling between making something that is fugitive and can be recycled back into the earth, or that can be preserved and enjoyed by future generations. So yeah, what that right answer is, I certainly don't know. But it's a complicated
Kelly and I are very much so. Kelly and I are both kind of grappling with the effect that some of our materials that we are using are already degrading. Mm-hmm. Kelly, you talked about the thread, the mohair.
Yeah, so that material, and one of the things I love about it is that it is not a permanent, it's not an archival material at all. And I think that like in your space, it's really lovely that it's not exposed to UV light. But I've another iteration of a piece similar to that. I thought, oh my gosh, it'd be wonderful to install it in a hospital or a place of healing, that it was a piece very much about sort of the disparate of spirit when someone dies, but it would not hold up at all, that material is transitory. And again, it's one of the things I love about it, that you have that contrast between something that is more permanent, that porcelain will be unchanged for the rest of time. It can break, but chemically it can never go back to what it was before, whereas the mohair will disintegrate, will biodegrade.
Great. Well, if there are no further questions, anything else that anyone wants to add on to the end of this?
I'll just, I want to just gush for a moment here at how thankful I am for able to invite me to the space, and then to be open to me inviting Danny. It's been just such an unbelievable pleasure to work with all of you. And then I will just say to Danny, I have many times gone to bed thinking I could not ever in my life find a better collaborator, someone who I feel completely free to express all of my thoughts to about art making and all of my questions. And I think in a true collaboration, there's no judgment, that we put out all the ideas on a table and then take back the ones that don't make sense and let the ideas grow. And it's a pretty unique experience to have a person that you feel that connected to in an artistic practice. So I want to say thanks to everyone at Able, and thank you, Danny, for the chance to work together.
Well, I would second that wholeheartely. I think after we installed the work, we were together for 3 days down there in Madison, or in Stoughton, kind of working so hard, kind of putting this together. And we came home, and we were, it was such a wonderful experience. And I kind of missed you for a few days there, Kelly. We were together so long. And so, especially leading up to it, all of the work in the studios and being able to, sit and just kind of noodle ideas out. It was kind of strange not having, I mean, we saw each other at work, of course, but it was like, it was a different way that we were relating to each other. So I completely agree. And yeah, again, I second Kelly, working with your gallery has been just a true joy. So thank you for making that experience happen for us.
Thank you for joining us. It was great to
Yeah.
have you here, and it's amazing to have the piece here and spend
Yeah,
some time with it.
Yeah,
All
thank you so much. This is,
Yeah.
again, one of our all-time favorite shows that have been here so far. So really great. And the show is up through the end of December. So if you've not seen it and you're in the area, please come and check it out. Come see it in person, spend some time with the piece. If you've seen it already, come back again, see it again. There's always more. Every time I come in here, I see something else that I can't believe I didn't see sooner, and it changes how you view the work. So it's a really rewarding piece to spend time with, or really rewarding exhibition to spend time with. So thank you so much. We also have 2 other fabulous shows on view at the gallery. There is the Cup Show, which is an invitational from artists from all over the country, all submitting cups. So we get to see lots of cool different forms. And then we also have a fabulous show of new work by printmaker Mary Hood and ceramicist Carl Borgeson. So those will also be up through the end of the year. Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.